I'd been hiking alone for almost a week, trying to follow some old, unmarked trails I found on a forgotten logging map of southern Oregon. Most of them were faded out or overgrown completely. It was quiet country, miles of pine and fir, with the occasional broken-down watchtower or moss-covered mile marker sticking out of the dirt like a gravestone. My legs ached. My boots were soaked from a creek crossing I'd misjudged that morning, and the sun was starting to dip behind the ridge to the west when I found the cabins. There were at least a dozen of them, scattered in a rough horseshoe along the base of a hill. No signs, no trails leading in or out, just a narrow fire road that had eroded into a shallow trench barely wide enough for a four-wheeler. I wouldn't have seen the cabins at all if I hadn't slipped on a muddy rock and landed hard enough to piss myself off and look up. That's when I noticed the edge of a roof, just barely peeking out through the trees. They looked long abandoned. Most had collapsed porches, glassless windows, and doors hanging crooked on rusted hinges. The wood was black in places, either from old fire damage or mold. I walked around slowly, cautious. It didn't feel right, but I was too tired to keep hiking. I checked the first two cabins. Nothing inside except broken furniture and piles of rodent shit. One had a collapsed floor. Another had a half-rotted mattress leaning up against a wall like someone had tried to drag it somewhere and gave up. Then I came to number 18. The number was burned into a wooden shingle nailed over the doorframe. The cabin itself looked not new but cared for. No broken windows. Door still sealed tight. Even the hinges looked oiled. The roof was intact and someone had cleared a path to the front steps. Barely, but enough that I could tell it had been walked recently. I paused, scanned the woods, then walked up and tried the door. It was locked. I stood there a minute, debating. It was almost dark. I didn't want to be out in the open, and my tent was still soaked from the night before. I pulled a multi-tool from my pack and wedged the edge under the latch. Popped open easier than I expected. I pushed the door inward and stepped inside. It smelled old, dusty, like aged cedar and stale sweat, but not moldy. The floorboards groaned a little under my weight. There was a single cot in the corner, covered in a threadbare wool blanket. A small wood-burning stove sat near the center, with a pile of chopped logs stacked neatly beside it. On the shelf above the stove, I saw a rusted tin pan, a chipped mug, a jar of something I didn't dare open, and a Polaroid camera. That's what stuck out. The camera. I picked it up. It was heavy and still had a roll in it. I pressed the shutter, clicked, and a photo slid out. I stared at it, not really expecting it to work. The photo developed slowly in my hand. Nothing but the inside of the cabin, what I just pointed at. I tossed it on the shelf and turned to the stove. Out of habit, I touched the pan. Warm. Not hot, but definitely not cold. I pulled my hand back like I'd been burned. My first instinct was to leave, but where would I go? It was already dark. My flashlight only had a couple hours of battery left, and I was exhausted. I shut the door, latched it behind me, and told myself someone must have been here recently and just left it unlocked. I didn't touch anything else. I didn't eat. I just rolled out my sleeping pad next to the cot and lay down with my pack as a pillow. My bear spray was already in my hand. I clicked off my headlamp and stared at the ceiling. I didn't sleep. Every sound outside made my heart jump. Branches snapping, wind moving through the trees, the occasional low hoot of an owl. Then, around midnight, I heard the footsteps. Slow, deliberate, pacing, just outside the cabin, back and forth across the porch. I sat up slowly, my body stiff and my mouth dry. I held my breath and waited for the sound to stop. Didn't. Kept going. 5 steps. Turn. 5 steps back. Sometimes a pause. Sometimes a light creak in the boards. I thought maybe it was an animal, but animals don't walk like that. Not measured. Not with that kind of rhythm. I reached for my flashlight, then stopped. I didn't want to make noise. Instead, I inched my way to the window and tried to look out. The glass was dirty, and all I could see was shadows. I waited for one of them to move. Nothing did, but the footsteps kept going. After a while, they stopped. I stayed crouched by the window for what felt like hours, barely blinking. At some point, I must have drifted off. The next thing I remember is cold morning light coming through the window. My neck was stiff and my back hurt from the angle I'd slept in. I stood up slowly. Everything looked the same inside the cabin. I felt a strange sense of relief, like maybe I'd dreamed it all. Then I walked to the door. It wouldn't open. I twisted the latch again and again. It moved, but the door itself didn't budge. I stepped back and pressed my shoulder into it. Solid. I looked through the window, squinting against the glare. The door was barricaded. Someone had wedged a heavy beam across it from the outside. The porch railing had been broken, and two of the thicker pieces were shoved tight against the door like braces. My stomach dropped. I stepped back and looked around the cabin again. That's when I noticed the closet. I hadn't opened it the night before. It was just a plain wooden door, no knob, just a little finger hole. I slid it open. Inside, the walls were covered in writing, all in pencil, scratched deep into the wood. No full sentences, just fragments, over and over again. Do not stay here. He walks at night. Too late, too late, too late, too late. And on the floor of the closet was a stack of Polaroids. Dozens, maybe more, all of them the same. Pictures of the inside of the cabin, slightly different angles, different times of day, some blurry, some clear. A few of them showed the door, a few showed the cot. One showed someone lying on the floor, asleep, from above, like the photo was taken from the rafters. I dropped it and stepped back fast. My head hit the closet frame and I nearly fell. My legs felt weak. I don't know how long I stood there. Eventually I got it together and turned back to the door. I didn't scream. I didn't panic. I just went quiet and started looking for something I could use. The cot frame was old metal. I yanked one of the bars loose and started working on the window. It took 20 minutes to pry the boards off. Then I wriggled through the gap and dropped hard into the dirt below. My shoulder cracked. I barely noticed. I grabbed my pack through the window, didn't bother latching it, and ran. I didn't stop until I was miles away. I didn't look back once. I followed the fire trail until I hit a service road and flagged down a forestry truck. I told the ranger I got lost, that I spent the night under a tree. I didn't mention the cabin. I never found it again. I went back 3 weeks later trying to retrace my steps. Nothing. Just endless woods and old logging roads that looped back on themselves. I spent 3 days searching. No cabins. No fire trail, no signs of anyone, but I know it was real. I still have the Polaroid, the one of me sleeping. I keep it in a box in the back of a closet, taped shut so it doesn't fall out. And every now and then, when I can't sleep, I take it out and stare at the edges, because there's a shape in the top corner, just a sliver of it barely visible. A hand, not mine. I booked the cabin because I was tired of everything, burned out from work, exhausted by the city, overwhelmed by people. I found it online, some rental site with glossy pictures. A sleek black painted A-frame tucked into the trees somewhere in the Catskills. Modern interior, heated floors, big windows looking out into white birch and pine. Promised peace. No neighbors, no traffic, just the woods and me. They said there'd be snow and I liked that. It sounded quiet. I needed quiet. I drove up early on a Friday morning, watching buildings thin into barns, then trees. The cabin sat at the end of a winding, unpaved road, past a closed gate with a code the host emailed me. It looked just like the pictures. Clean lines, wide glass doors, stone path leading from where I parked to the front steps. It was cold, but not too bad yet. There were clouds gathering, but I figured I'd have a day or two before it really hit. Inside, the place smelled new, like pine and varnish. It had one big open space with a wood stove in the corner, a small but high-end kitchen with black stone counters and mat cabinets, a bedroom tucked behind a sliding door, and a bathroom with a rainfall shower. I liked it immediately, too nice to feel rustic, but not enough to feel like I was still in Manhattan. I spent the first day just walking around, read a little, sat on the couch and listened to the wind move through the trees. That night it snowed, just a little, just enough to coat the deck and the ground like powdered sugar. It was still beautiful, The second night, it changed. The storm came heavy and fast. I stood at the big front window and watched it swallow the trees in thick white sheets. The wind picked up, whistling low through the branches, making the cabin creak. Around 9, the power went out. It wasn't too surprising. Places like this probably lost power all the time in bad weather. I had the fire going, and the host had left a flashlight and candles. I lit a few and sat by the stove with a blanket. No power also meant no internet. No signal either. My phone kept searching, but nothing came through. I turned it off to save the battery. I figured I'd be fine for a night or two. I had plenty of groceries and firewood. When I woke up the next morning, the snow had stopped. Everything outside was white and untouched. I made instant coffee with hot water from the stove and stepped out onto the deck to breathe. The air was clean and cold. My boots left crisp prints on the snow-covered wood. I looked around, more out of habit than anything else. That's when I saw the footprints. One set, not mine, bigger than mine, wider. They came from the woods, from the slope just past the treeline, and ended at the side of the cabin, right by the kitchen window. There were no prints going back. I stood still, just staring. My mind tried to explain it. Maybe a ranger or something, maybe someone checking the property? But why walk up in the middle of a snowstorm? Why come up to the window? I walked around the whole cabin. No other tracks, no tire marks, no animals, nothing disturbed. Just those prints. One set. I followed them to the edge of the trees, but they just disappeared into the slope. The snow there had been more disturbed, like it had fallen harder. The prints were clear for about 15 feet, then nothing, like whoever made them had just vanished, or like they came out after the snow stopped. I went back inside and locked the door. I checked the windows, all locked. Everything was exactly where I'd left it, except it wasn't. The groceries. I had brought 2 paper bags of groceries from my car when I arrived. I remembered putting the cold stuff in the fridge and stacking the rest on the counter. Now the cans were rearranged. The cereal box was on its side. A few protein bars had been moved to the opposite end of the counter. Nothing was missing, just not how I'd left it. I told myself maybe I moved it and forgot. Maybe I'd knocked the box over and didn't notice. Maybe the wind from the door moving things slightly. I told myself that, but I didn't believe it. That night, I barely slept. Every sound in the woods felt sharp, like it meant something. I kept the fire going, sat up with my flashlight in my lap. I didn't hear anything. No knocks, no footsteps, but I kept checking the windows anyway. The next morning, it was the same. One set of footprints in the snow, coming from the woods, ending near the house, this time at the back by the bathroom window. No tracks leading away. I didn't go outside. I looked from the window and didn't move. The prints were fresh. The snow hadn't covered them yet, and they were the same shape, same size. I stared at them for a long time. I didn't want to be outside. I didn't even want to be inside anymore. I started checking the cabin. Every drawer, every cabinet, every inch of the floor. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe just to prove there was no one else here, that I hadn't lost my mind. I checked under the bed, inside the closets. I opened the door to the basement. It wasn't a real basement, just a crawl space. You had to pull up a small hatch in the hallway floor to get to it. I hadn't looked in there before. I hadn't needed to, but now I had to. I lifted the hatch and shone my flashlight down. A wooden ladder dropped into the dark. The air that came out was cold and stale. I climbed down slowly. My boots hit the dirt floor and I crouched low, scanning the space. It was narrow, not more than 4 feet high, with wooden beams across the top and stone walls. The flashlight caught something in the corner. A blanket, a ratty one, bunched up. Beside it, a stack of empty food wrappers, the same brand as mine, one of the protein bar wrappers, and an empty can of soup I hadn't opened yet. There was a smell too, not strong, but sour, like sweat and old clothes. Someone had been living down there. Someone was still living down there. I climbed back up fast, heart hammering so hard it hurt. I closed the hatch and dragged the couch over it. I locked the front door, double-checked the windows. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and didn't move for hours. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't light the fire. I didn't want them to know I was still awake. I sat in the dark and listened. At some point, I must have dozed off because I woke up to a faint sound. Wood creaking. Not loud. Not like footsteps. More like something shifting slowly. Like weight being moved. I held my breath. Came from under me. I stayed still until the sky began to lighten through the windows. Then I moved. I packed everything in under 5 minutes. I didn't even put on socks. Just shoved my feet in boots and grabbed my keys. Outside, the snow was deep, but the path to my car was clear. Not plowed, just cleared. Someone had walked it over and over. I didn't look back at the house. I got in the car and reversed down the drive. I didn't breathe until I passed the gate. Later, when I got back into range, I called the sheriff's office. I didn't want to. I wanted to forget it all. But I told them what I found. The crawl space, the food, the footprints. They said they'd check it out. They called me 2 days later. Said there were signs someone had been living under the cabin. Bedding, trash, scratches on the beams, like someone had marked time with a knife. No one was there when they arrived, but the prints were still around the property. They said it wasn't the first time, that it happens more than people think. They asked if I wanted to press charges. I said no. I just wanted to go home. I haven't left the city since. I was staying in a cabin deep in the northern woods of Michigan, not too far from the Canadian border. It was early fall, late September, and I had taken a week off work to just be by myself. I needed it. I was tired of people, phones, traffic, everything. My friend's uncle had a small off-grid cabin out there that he barely used anymore. No power, no plumbing, no cell service. Just a propane stove, a well pump, a wood stove, and a beat-up mattress in the loft. He gave me the key and told me to enjoy the quiet. Said there were no neighbors for at least 4 or 5 miles in any direction. I liked the sound of that. I packed some basic gear, a cooler with food, some firewood, a book, and a .22 rifle just in case. I wasn't expecting trouble. I just figured there might be raccoons or maybe a fox. It was a 2-hour drive on a paved road. Then another hour down a twisting dirt road that got more and more narrow the further I went. Trees crowded the road so tight near the end I was worried they'd scrape the paint off my truck. When I finally arrived, the cabin was just a little rectangle of gray wood sitting at the edge of a clearing. Roof sloped with moss growing on the shingles. A rusted tin chimney poked up through the top and smoke stains ran down the siding from it. The windows were shut and covered from the inside. The door stuck and I had to shoulder it open. Inside was dark and musty. I opened the windows to air it out, lit the pilot on the propane stove, and brought in my stuff. It was quiet, real quiet. Not a car, not a plane, not even wind in the trees. The kind of silence that presses on your ears. The only sounds were leaves rustling now and then and a few birds calling somewhere far off. I sat on the small front step for a while, just taking it in. Nothing but trees and sky and dirt. Felt good. I spent the first couple days just relaxing. I'd go for short hikes around the woods, not far, just within a couple miles. I come back, cook something simple, read, maybe write a bit. I collect wood, cut some kindling. It was peaceful. The nights were cold, but the little wood stove kept it warm enough. I slept okay, though I'd wake up a few times in the night. There was always a lot of snapping and cracking in the woods. Twigs breaking, leaves crunching. Normal forest sounds, I figured. Everything makes noise in the woods at night. I didn't think much of it. But around the third night, I noticed something different. I woke up around 2 or 3 a.m. and felt something was off. It wasn't the usual creaks or animal rustling. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Then I heard this soft, rhythmic crunching sound. Not fast, but steady, like someone walking slowly through dry leaves. I sat up in bed and just listened. It stopped after maybe 15 seconds. I waited, staring at the ceiling, not breathing. I didn't hear it again. I figured maybe it was a deer or something. I told myself that and went back to sleep eventually. The next morning I checked around the cabin but didn't see anything strange. No prints, nothing moved. Still, I felt unsettled. That day, I stayed closer to the cabin, collected more wood, tried to relax, but I was a little on edge. That night, I made sure the doors were locked and I placed the rifle next to the bed. I had this weird gut feeling, couldn't shake it, like I wasn't as alone as I thought. At some point in the middle of that night, I woke up again. I didn't sit up this time, just laid there listening. The fire had gone out and the room was cold. It was dead quiet again. Then I heard it, footsteps. They were slow, careful, and they were definitely human, not an animal. I know the sound of boots on packed dirt and dry twigs. They moved around the cabin, not in a straight line, but more like a slow circle. I could tell by the sound, close, then a little further, then closer again. They stopped behind the cabin. I waited. Nothing. Just silence. After maybe a minute, the front step creaked. My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might echo. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I was in the loft, so I had a view of the main room below, but not the door. I stared at the wall and waited for the knob to turn, for the door to creak open. But nothing happened. Just silence. Then the steps again, moving away, slow, steady. After a few minutes, I couldn't hear them anymore. I laid there until dawn. Didn't sleep at all. I got up when the light came in and checked the door. It was still locked. No signs of forced entry. I went outside and checked the ground. I found them, footprints. Real human ones. Not boot prints. Bare feet. They were long, narrow, and the toes had dragged a little in the dirt. Whoever it was had walked right up to the door and stood there. I followed the prints around the cabin. They circled it once and disappeared into the woods on the north side. I stood there for a long time, just staring into the trees. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to feel like I was running. Maybe I thought it was some messed up prank. But deep down, I think I just didn't want to admit I was scared. I stayed one more night. That day, I barely left the cabin. I kept the rifle in arm's reach at all times. I checked the windows, moved a chair in front of the door, just in case. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in a chair in the main room facing the door, fire going low. Just sat there listening. Around midnight, I heard them again. Footsteps from the same direction. Slow, measured, coming from the trees. No flashlight, no talking, no animal noises. Just the sound of leaves and twigs crunching. They walked right up to the front of the cabin again and stopped. I held the rifle across my lap. My mouth was dry. I could hear them breathing. Not loud, but there, just on the other side of the door. Then the doorknob moved. Just a tiny rattle, like they were testing it. I aimed at the door and said nothing. I didn't want to make a sound. The knob moved again. Then silence. I held still for what felt like an hour. No more sounds. Eventually, I heard the steps again, retreating into the woods, slower than before, dragging. At first light, I packed everything up, threw it in the truck, and drove out fast. Didn't look back, didn't stop. I made it to the small town an hour and a half away and went straight to the diner. Sat there with a coffee and didn't say a word to anyone. I don't know who or what that was. I don't know why they were barefoot, why they came at night, why they never said anything. I've run through 1,000 theories in my head. Someone living feral in the woods, a squatter, a crazy local. But none of it adds up. No tracks, no gear, no light. Just quiet footsteps in the night. I never went back to that cabin. I never asked my friend's uncle if he knew anything about it. I figured if he did, he would have warned me. Or maybe he didn't want to know either. Some things just don't make sense. You try to explain them away, try to give them logic, but they don't fit anywhere. They just stay in your mind, like a shadow that doesn't move with the sun. I sleep fine now, mostly, but sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up, heart pounding, and I just listen. Listen for footsteps. I drove up to rural Maine in early October. The road got narrower the further I went. Trees thickening along the shoulders, leaves already turning deep red and burnt orange. I hadn't been this far north in years. The last time I saw the cabin, I was a kid, probably 8 or 9. My grandfather used to bring me here in the summers. We'd fish on the lake a mile down the road and chop wood for the fire. After he died, the place just sat empty for decades, I guess. When the lawyer called to tell me I inherited it, I figured I'd clear it out and put it on the market. I didn't feel any strong attachment to it, just another chore. The nearest town was 20 minutes out, a small strip of sagging buildings and faded gas stations. I stopped at a local store for gas and some supplies, canned food, water, batteries. The guy behind the counter didn't say much, just nodded at me, rang me up. I told him I was heading out to the old Belden cabin, and I noticed him freeze for a second. His eyes narrowed just slightly, like he was about to say something, but then he just said, "That's so," and gave me my change. A few others in the store glanced over. They didn't smile. No one welcomed me back. One old man with a gray beard and cloudy eyes finally came up to me as I was walking to my truck. He pointed with his cane, slow, and said, "That place belonged to Donnie Brewer and his boy. Disappeared sometime in the 80s. Left his tools and everything. That was all." Then he turned and walked off. The drive up to the cabin was rough. The dirt road hadn't been maintained in years, rutted out from rain and tree roots. My tires kicked up rocks and dead leaves the whole way. When I finally pulled up, the place looked smaller than I remembered. Weather-worn wood, shingles peeling, porch sagging a bit on the left side. But it was still standing. The front door creaked when I pushed it open. The smell hit me first, damp wood, mold, maybe a little mouse piss. I coughed and flicked on my flashlight. Inside was just as I remembered. A small main room with a stone fireplace, a couple of chairs, and a table. A narrow hall led to a bedroom and a tiny kitchen. Dust was everywhere. Dead bugs in the corners. Cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. I set my duffel bag down, opened a few windows to let the air move. I figured I'd sleep there that night just to save money on a motel. It didn't feel creepy exactly, just old and forgotten. That first night was quiet. Cold, but quiet. I slept in my clothes, wrapped in a couple of blankets I found in a trunk. The wind rustled through the trees. At one point, I thought I heard something walking around outside. Maybe a deer or a raccoon. I didn't think much of it. It's the woods. Things move at night. The next day, I started clearing stuff out. There wasn't much. A few old tools, some rusted cans in the kitchen, piles of junk in the closet. I found one of my grandfather's old axes, still sharp. I kept that. Thought it might come in handy if I needed to chop wood or clear some brush. Later that afternoon, I wandered out back. The trees were dense, thick undergrowth choking most of the space behind the cabin. I was pushing through some branches when I saw it. A tripwire, knee-height, strung between two saplings. I stopped just short of it. I followed the wire with my eyes to the side where it was tied to a bent branch rigged to swing a nail-studded board. It wasn't just some kids messing around. Someone had built a real trap. I stepped back, heart thumping. I looked around, suddenly aware of how quiet it was. No birds, no wind, just silence. I went back inside, locked the door, and didn't sleep well that night. Every time a branch creaked, I sat up. I kept the axe beside me in bed. I told myself I'd leave in the morning, sell the cabin as is, let someone else deal with it. But I didn't leave. I don't know why. Part of it was stubbornness. Part of it was curiosity. Who builds traps in the woods behind an abandoned cabin? The next day I found more. A pit covered with branches. Nails driven through planks and buried in the leaves. A set of sharp sticks angled into the path like punji traps. Crude but dangerous. I started thinking maybe it was some hunter trying to keep people out, or some off-grid type who didn't want company. Either way, it was someone who knew what they were doing. Then I found the animal bones, picked clean, some still tied up like bait, and a small clearing with what looked like a fire pit, but it was surrounded by walls of brush and branches, almost like a makeshift shelter. Old cans and bits of clothing hung from the trees. One of the shirts looked like it might have been from the 80s. That was when I started to feel genuinely afraid. I went back to the cabin fast, locked the door, pushed a dresser in front of it. I didn't go out again that day. I sat by the window listening. I thought about calling the sheriff, but I didn't have service out there. My phone was barely useful, and I didn't feel like walking a couple miles back to the truck just to make a call. I told myself I'd leave at first light. That night, I heard someone on the porch. Not an animal. Slow, deliberate steps, wood creaking under weight. I held my breath. They stopped right by the door. Didn't knock, just stood there. Then I heard them move around the side of the house. I crept to the window, careful not to make noise. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. Someone was out there. I didn't sleep. I kept the axe in my hands, sitting in a chair facing the door. At some point, the footsteps stopped, but I never heard them walk away. The next morning, I opened the door slowly, axe raised. Nothing, but in the middle of the path was a dead squirrel. Its neck snapped, laid out neatly on a flat rock. A warning or a message? Either way, it meant someone had been close enough to leave it there without me hearing. I packed my things and went to my truck. I drove out without looking back. The sheriff in the nearest town didn't say much when I told him what happened. Just said it wasn't the first time someone had reported strange things up that way. Some folks go up into the woods and don't come back, he told me. They got used to being alone. You showing up probably stirred up something that didn't want to be stirred. I ended up selling the cabin cheap to some out-of-state buyer who probably just wanted the land. I didn't go back. Didn't want to. I still think about it sometimes. Not ghosts or anything like that. Just the idea that someone had been living there all that time. Watching the cabin. Building traps. Waiting for someone to come back so they could defend what they thought was theirs. No one ever found Donnie Brewer or his son. No records. No bones. Just vanished. But I'm pretty sure at least one of them never left those woods. And I think they didn't want to be found. We got to the cabin just before sunset. The drive up through the Smoky Mountains had been quiet, a little too quiet. The last town we passed was almost an hour back, and even that had been just a gas station and a diner. The trees got thicker as we climbed higher. Patches of snow still lingered in the shaded spots off the side of the road, even though it was early spring. Everything was still a little wet, the ground soft from the thaw, the trees just starting to bud. The road to the cabin turned into a narrow gravel path, winding through the trees. The last quarter mile, it felt like we were completely alone in the woods. The cabin was a small A-frame with a big front porch, one of those places that looked like it came off a brochure. It had a green tin roof, stacked firewood near the door, and 2 rocking chairs facing the woods. No other houses or cabins in sight, just trees in every direction. There was a chill in the air, the kind that settles in your bones after the sun dips. The rental listing said the cabin was remote, perfect for unplugging. But standing there in the quiet, it suddenly felt a little too remote. No cell signal, no Wi-Fi. I remember making a joke about being in a horror movie, but my voice sounded weird in the stillness, like it didn't belong. We unloaded the car and brought our bags inside. It was clean, cozy. Someone had put effort into making it feel homey. A small kitchen, a stone fireplace in the living room, 1 bedroom in the back with a queen-sized bed, and a bathroom with a clawfoot tub. We opened a bottle of wine and made dinner. Nothing fancy, just pasta with Jared sauce. The kitchen window looked out at the woods, and by the time we ate, it was full dark outside. No lights anywhere but ours. No sound but the creaking of the trees in the wind. After dinner, I went into the bedroom to unpack. That's when I saw it. A coat, a woman's coat, hanging in the closet. I stopped, staring at it. It was a long, dark green wool coat, the kind people wear to stay warm walking in a cold city. It looked expensive, too expensive to just leave behind. I called out to my partner and asked if maybe the cleaners forgot to take it out, or if it was a decoration or something weird like that. He came in, took one look at it and said, "That's not in the pictures." He was right. We'd looked at the listing a dozen times. There was no coat. We both just stood there. The closet had 2 hangers and the coat was on one. Nothing else. The cabin wasn't messy. Nothing looked ransacked, but the coat threw everything off. I reached into the pockets. They were empty. It didn't smell musty or old. Smelled used. Faint perfume. The kind someone would still be wearing. That's what did it for me. This wasn't forgotten. This was recent. Trying to calm ourselves, we searched the cabin. Every drawer, every cabinet. Nothing really stood out until I looked at the nightstand by the bed. There was a phone charging, plugged into the wall, just sitting there face down. Not mine, not his, an older iPhone. Not super new, but not ancient either. I didn't want to touch it, but I did. I turned it over and the screen lit up. Locked, obviously. No notifications, no name. Just the time and the background, some forest trail photo, nothing you'd recognize. We stood there, staring at it. That's when I noticed something else. The battery was at 92%. The charger was warm. Someone had plugged it in today. Not last week. Not last month. Today. My mouth went dry. I unplugged the phone, held it out to him, and he just looked at me. We both knew what this meant. Someone else had been here today. Or worse, someone else was still here. We hadn't locked the door when we came in. I suddenly couldn't remember if the door had even been locked when we arrived. I had just pushed it open. We moved fast then, checking every inch of the cabin again, this time with our hearts pounding. Under the bed, in the tiny closet in the hallway, even the crawlspace access in the floor of the kitchen pantry. Nothing. No one. It didn't make sense. There was only one door and the windows were all shut. I tried the front door lock. It worked. So we locked it, then pushed the couch in front of the door. He grabbed the big knife from the kitchen drawer. I took the fire poker. We turned off all the lights and sat in the dark, listening. Every creak in the walls made me jump. The woods outside were silent, that kind of silence that feels like it's waiting. Then something made the porch creak. We both froze. The couch groaned as he shifted, crouched low, peeking over it to look out the window. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The creaking came again, slow, then stopped. We waited for what felt like forever. He whispered that he couldn't see anyone. I crawled to the bedroom and grabbed the phone again. I pressed the screen. It was still at 92%. I don't know why I expected it to change. We turned the lights on, checked again. Still no one. I wanted to leave, but it was almost midnight by then. The gravel road was winding, unlit, and full of turns we didn't remember. There was no GPS to guide us back down. So we stayed. We locked the bedroom door, piled furniture in front of it, and kept the kitchen knife between us in bed. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the door. When morning came, we left fast. We didn't shower, didn't eat. We threw everything in the trunk and drove back down the mountain. Every turn, I kept checking the rearview mirror. Back in town, we finally got signal. I called the number on the listing. It rang once, then went straight to voicemail. A man's voice, generic message. I texted him. No reply. Later that afternoon, I checked the listing again. It was gone. Not marked as unavailable, gone. Like it had never existed. I called Airbnb's customer support, told them the story. The girl on the phone sounded confused. Said she couldn't find any listing matching the number I gave. I asked if they had records of the owner. She said she'd escalate it and get back to me. They never did. I still have a picture of the phone I took with mine, just in case. Every now and then I scroll back to it, wondering who it belonged to, wondering how long it had been there, wondering if we had walked right past someone when we arrived, someone hiding in a closet, or the crawl space, or outside watching. We were lucky. I don't know how else to explain it. Nothing ever came of it. But the feeling of being watched, of knowing we were not alone, that feeling never really left. We check closets now. Every trip, every rental, every hotel room, even when it feels safe, because that cabin felt safe too, until it didn't. We left campus right after our last class before Thanksgiving break. It was a 4-hour drive up into the mountains. My buddy Nate's uncle had a hunting cabin out near the West Virginia border, middle of nowhere, surrounded by thick forest and backed up against thousands of acres of leased hunting land. I'd never been hunting and didn't care to, but the idea of spending the break somewhere quiet with cold beer, a wood stove, and no cell service sounded like exactly what I needed. There were 5 of us, me, Nate, Kyle, Evan, and Jordan. We crammed into Kyle's old SUV, packed with coolers, beer, and way too much food. Nate had the key to the place and swore it was stocked with everything we needed. Bunks, a stove, a generator, even a little old TV with a DVD player. The drive-in was mostly unpaved once we got off the main road, winding through thick trees and up a narrow gravel path that barely looked like it got used. The cabin was older than I expected. Log construction, weathered wood, tin roof, but solid. A few old deer skulls hung outside near the porch, and there were animal prints frozen in the muddy patches around the driveway. Nate's uncle was a serious hunter, the kind who cleaned and mounted everything he shot. We found racks of antlers and framed trail cam photos inside, some showing huge bucks standing just feet from the cabin. Before he left us alone, Nate's uncle gave us a few instructions. Don't leave food outside, lock the door at night, and whatever we did, we were not to go past the orange markings on the trees at the north end of the property. That was the border with private land, not part of the lease, and the owners didn't take kindly to trespassers. He made it sound like we might get shot just for stepping foot across the line. We all kind of laughed at that, but he didn't, just said, "Don't test them. You're not out here alone." The first day was quiet, cold, with that dry late fall wind that carried the smell of pine and rotting leaves. We chopped firewood, lit up the stove, cooked burgers on the little grill outside. After dark, we sat around drinking beers, playing cards, and roasting marshmallows we found in the cabinet. There wasn't much light out there. No street lamps, no neighbors, just stars. The kind of dark where your eyes don't fully adjust. A few times I thought I saw movement out in the trees when I stepped out to piss, but it was probably just deer or raccoons. That night, I heard the first gunshot. Just one. Loud, sharp, not far off. I sat up in my bunk, heart thumping, but nobody else stirred. I waited, listening. Nothing. No follow-up shot, no voices, no footsteps. I told myself it was probably a hunter shooting something late, maybe heading out and taking a last shot at a deer. In the morning, I didn't mention it. I wasn't even sure I really heard it, or if it was just a dream. But when Kyle went out to grab firewood, he came back holding a spent rifle casing he found near the front steps. It wasn't one of ours, we hadn't shot anything, hadn't even brought any guns. We passed it around, everyone getting a little quieter. That afternoon, we walked the tree line with Nate to find those orange marks. There were faded plastic strips tied to trees every 20 feet or so, but we noticed a few new-looking ones too, bright and clean, like someone had replaced them recently. That didn't sit right with any of us. The second night, the shots came again. 2 this time, one distant, one much closer. It was just past midnight, and we were all still up, watching some dumb movie on DVD. When the sound echoed through the woods, the room went silent. Nobody spoke for a few seconds. Then Evan got up and killed the generator, plunging us into darkness. We sat there, barely breathing, trying to hear past the ringing in our ears. We didn't sleep well after that. Jordan said he saw a light out in the woods around 3 in the morning. Just for a second, a flicker of white or blue, like a flashlight moving between trees. When we checked in the morning, we found fresh boot prints in the muddy patch behind the cabin. They weren't ours. Later that day, I spotted something in the trees while I was out taking a piss. Something small and metallic wedged high up between 2 branches. I climbed halfway up and realized it was a motion-triggered camera, facing the cabin. I called the others, and we spent the next hour walking the tree line and found 3 more cameras. All pointed toward our site, none of them ours, and all zip-tied to trees like they'd been placed with care. Someone had been watching us. We argued for a while about what to do. There was no cell signal. The landline in the cabin didn't work. The road back was too rough to drive at night, and it was already getting dark. We decided we'd leave first thing in the morning. Nobody wanted to stay another night, not even Nate. That last night, we were paranoid. We triple-locked the doors, dragged furniture in front of them. We kept the generator off, lit candles instead, and didn't talk much. Around 10, Kyle volunteered to grab more beer from the SUV. It was parked maybe 30 yards from the cabin, out near the edge of the treeline. We watched him walk out through the front window, flashlight bobbing with each step. A few minutes passed, then 10, then 15. Nate and Evan went out to look for him. They came back 10 minutes later, faces pale, no sign of Kyle. The car was open, keys still in the ignition. A case of beer sat in the back seat, untouched. His flashlight lay on the ground, still on, but no tracks leading away. Nothing. We searched with our flashlights for 2 hours, yelling his name until our throats hurt. Nothing. Just cold, black woods swallowing our voices. Eventually we gave up and sat inside. Knives in our laps, the stove burned low. Nobody slept. Just after dawn, I went outside alone, needing air, needing to be away from the suffocating tension inside. I walked toward the treeline. The woods were silent, except for the wind. 100 feet out, I saw something high in a tree. At first I thought it was just a sack or a tarp caught on a branch. But as I got closer, I saw the shape. Kyle's body was propped up on a deer stand. He was sitting in it like a trophy, arms at his sides, head slumped forward. His shirt was missing, and his chest was cut open. I threw up right there in the snow. I could barely breathe, couldn't move. I staggered back to the cabin and screamed for the others. When we returned, Nate climbed up. Kyle's eyes had been taped open. There was a trail cam strapped to a nearby tree, aimed directly at him. We left everything behind, just grabbed the keys, jumped into the SUV, and drove like hell. The road tore up the undercarriage, but we didn't stop. We hit pavement 2 hours later and finally got enough signal to call the state police. They took our statements, sent a team out. Later, they said the property owner claimed ignorance, said he hadn't been up there in months. The deer stand wasn't his, he said. Neither were the cameras. They never caught anyone. Kyle's death was ruled a homicide, but with no leads, no suspects, and no fingerprints, the case went cold. The cameras had all been wiped. Whoever did it knew what they were doing. I haven't been back in the woods since. Every year around Thanksgiving, I get nightmares. I see Kyle sitting in that stand, eyes wide, mouth open like he's about to speak, but he never does. Someone was hunting us, not for food, not by accident, just because they could. It was late October when my friend Eric and I rented the cabin in northern Idaho. It was one of those last-minute ideas we both agreed to over text. A break from work, some time in the woods, and maybe a little hunting if the weather held out. I'd found the cabin listed in an old forum thread about off-grid retreats. It was small, tucked away past Priest Lake, about 10 miles down a dirt road that didn't even show up on Google Maps. The owner had emailed me directions, said to bring everything we'd need: food, fuel, tools. He mentioned there was no cell service, but the cabin had a wood stove and a generator if we brought gas. We arrived late in the afternoon, just before dark. The road in was rough, like really rough, narrow and uneven, climbing through thick forest with no signs or markers. But we made it in my truck, slowly crawling over rocks and roots. The cabin was basic: 1 floor, small porch, 2 rooms, and a woodshed out back. No neighbors, no traffic, nothing but forest in every direction. It was perfect. That first night, we unpacked, got the fire going, and cooked on the propane stove. I remember feeling completely relaxed. No emails, no traffic, just the wind through the trees and the crackling wood. We drank a couple beers, played cards by lantern light, and crashed early. It got real cold after dark, but the stove kept things bearable. The next morning, we made a list of things we forgot. More bottled water, extra propane, coffee filters. We drove out mid-morning to the nearest town, which was about 45 minutes away on pavement. We stopped at a small hardware store, then a grocery place, grabbed what we needed. I think we were only gone 3 hours total. But when we got back to the forest road that led to the cabin, something was different. There was a chain, a thick metal one, stretched between 2 trees on either side of the road. It was padlocked shut. First, we just stared at it. It looked old but solid. The trees it was chained to weren't small either, no way to move them. I got out and walked up to it, thinking maybe we just missed it on the way in, but I was sure it hadn't been there. There was no sign, no notice, just the chain right across the only way in or out. We didn't panic right away. Felt like a mistake. Maybe the landowner or some logging crew put it up by accident. We walked up and down the tree line a bit, looking for another path or side road, but there was nothing but undergrowth and thick pine woods. Eric gave the padlock a few hits with a wrench from the truck, but it barely dented the casing. We ended up just driving back to the cabin. We figured we could deal with it tomorrow. Worst case, we'd walk out with our gear and call someone from the highway. That night, I kept thinking about the chain. I couldn't shake the feeling it wasn't a mistake. Something about the way it was set up. Not just some loose chain draped across, but taut and locked, like someone had waited for us to leave before putting it up. The next morning, we found both rear tires on my truck slashed, not punctured by rocks, cut. Clean, deep slices in the sidewalls. The truck was useless now. We didn't say much. I think both of us were trying not to show how shaken we were. Still, we stayed calm. We were miles from town with no cell service, but we had food, water, shelter. We took stock of our supplies, made sure everything was sealed up, and tried to keep the generator use to a minimum to conserve gas. The weather had started turning, cloudy, colder, wind picking up in the afternoons. We stayed close to the cabin. The forest around us suddenly felt much less peaceful. I started noticing how quiet it got during the day. No birds, no squirrels, just wind and the occasional creak of the trees. We kept the axe by the door and one of the hunting rifles loaded. I remember walking around the cabin slowly that afternoon, checking the windows, scanning the tree line. I couldn't see anything, but the feeling of being watched never went away. That night, I barely slept. Sometime just before dawn, I heard something, not loud, just a faint creak, like a floorboard. I sat up and held my breath. The fire in the stove had died down, and the cabin was freezing. I didn't wake Eric. I just listened. I thought maybe I imagined it. In the morning, we found one of the kitchen cupboards open and several food packages disturbed. Not taken, just opened, like someone was trying to look through them. No signs of forced entry. The door was still locked, windows unbroken, but someone had been inside while we slept. We both kept our guns with us after that. We took turns sleeping, one of us always awake, keeping the fire going, watching the door. That evening, I was on watch when I saw him just for a second. Movement at the edge of the trees, maybe 40 yards out. A flash of camouflage, the kind hunters wear, then gone. I told Eric. We didn't go outside. The next day, we found the woodshed had been messed with. The door cracked open, some logs scattered. We tried to look for tracks, but the ground was too dry and covered with pine needles. No clear prints, nothing to follow. I climbed onto the roof of the cabin that afternoon to get a better view. From up there, I could see how boxed in we were. Just thick, unbroken trees in every direction. No signs of life, no smoke, no roads. Just us. That night, we kept the lanterns off and stayed quiet. It was completely dark outside. No moon, no stars. At one point, maybe midnight, we both heard crunching footsteps on the gravel outside. Slow, steady, then nothing. I had the rifle aimed at the door for hours, but it never opened. The footsteps never came back. The next morning, we made a decision. We packed light, water, food, rifles, left everything else. We were going to hike out, follow the dirt road back to the highway. It would take all day, maybe longer, but staying there felt worse. When we opened the door to leave, there was a dead rabbit hanging by its feet from the porch overhang. Gutted, blood dripping onto the steps. We didn't say a word, just stepped around it and started walking. We hiked fast, didn't stop to rest, didn't speak. Every couple minutes, I'd glance back over my shoulder. I swear I saw movement behind us a few times, too far to be sure, but I kept seeing those same flashes of green and brown, like someone ducking behind trees. We finally made it to the highway just before dark. A passing truck picked us up maybe an hour later. We didn't tell him much, just said our truck broke down and we needed a tow. When we got back to town, I called the sheriff and filed a report. They said they'd look into it. Said the land was technically private, but ownership was unclear. logging company, maybe a trust. I never got a call back. A month later, I checked satellite maps online. The road to the cabin didn't even show up anymore. Just a blur of green. I never went back. Neither did Eric. We don't talk about it much, but every now and then, I'll get a package in the mail. No return address. Once it was a rabbit's foot. Another time, a photo, blurry, black and white, of a figure standing in the trees. We were lucky to get out. I know that now. Whoever it was, they didn't want us dead. They wanted us scared. And it worked.